Welcome, everybody, to this first time we've done a program on the Select Board of Greensboro. And the first thing we had to do was find out who were all the select people. And I cleverly got out all the town reports, boxes of them, and Paula went through them all and picked them all up. And then I've discovered, or Nancy discovered, we have a list right there in the appendix of our green history. So we can use that book, and we want to again promote that book. We're going to be selling it at the town meeting, and we found out from the town government that they use that book daily. It has so much information. Every new person who joins the government gets a copy. So we've brought it back out again, and we're going to try to sell it because it does have a lot of stuff in it. And I also wanted to tell you about this photograph exhibit. The New Gazette owners, for some reason, gave all of their old pictures to the Hardwick Historical Society. So they dutifully went through every single picture, matched it up with the caption in the papers. They must have every paper too, so they've been sitting there for weeks, months, matching those pictures with captions, writing the captions on the back, and then all the Greensboro ones they gave to us, and they're also giving a whole pile to Craftsbury. So all of a sudden we have, I bet we have like 300 pictures, and they're all between 78 and 94, so essentially the 80s. And we decided that's going to be an exhibit that's going up this summer. So we typed up all the captions and matched them with the pictures after we got copies. And then we're now going to post them in the Historical Society for the exhibit, and probably have some items that go with the pictures, like if somebody's holding the trophy, maybe we can get that trophy and put it in the exhibit. So we're working on that now. I wanted to explain all this. Please look at those. They're wonderful. We brought the ones that are all about our government, so they'll have several of the select people, especially the ones from the 80s. So right now I'd like to introduce Clive Ray, and he will be running the meeting. I'll give it over to Clive.
Thank you. I hold this lofty post in my capacity as treasurer of the Historical Society, and I have tried to do a little history of the Select Board for the Hazen Road Dispatch, which is our annual publication. I urge you all to buy one next spring or summer. Gail Sangry is the editor, and she's busily putting articles together for the 2018 Hazen Road Dispatch. And in going through the old records, I discovered that, of course, the town records burned in, we know exactly when they burned, August 9, 1831. And so we have no record of the Select Board before 1832, as a matter of fact. Does anybody here know anything about the first 30 years of the 19th century? Because if you do, I would love to include that in the articles. The Greensboro, the 200-year history of Greensboro has every select board starting in 1832 up to the publication of the history. But we don't even know when the select board was founded. The town population was in 1800, the census counted 281 residents. Would there have been a select board already for 281 residents? Anybody? Mike, do you have any reaction to that?
I guess yes.
I would say yes.
And then in 1810, there were 566 residents. So I think it's highly likely that there was a select board by then. But unless any of you have information, we do not know. So without further ado, we will turn to our panel, and we will go in order in which members of the Greensboro Select Board were elected and served. And the first member of our panel to serve was Tim Nisbet, who was elected in 1974 and served till 76. Is that right, Tim?
Yes, I did 74, 5, and 6.
74, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
The timer is on. Okay, first of all, you're expecting me to remember things that happened over 40 years ago. It's hard enough to remember breakfast. Second thing is, this is a town report from 1974. Look how small and how brief it is. Yes, the printing is a bit smaller, but it's quite concise and really interesting to read this stuff. So I guess you want me to talk about highlights of when I was a select board member? And anecdotes, okay. This is back when we had a 3-member board, as I think most of us served on a 3-member board. Everett Young was a member, George's dad, and he was a farmer. So what was he doing? He was off in the farm, on the fields all the time. We're doing chores. Henry Merrill, Mary's dad, was the other one, and he was a contractor, so he was out pounding nails. I, however, was a sitting duck right at Greensboro Garage, so I was always available during the week if anybody had an item that they wanted to discuss with the select board. But it was a real honor. I think I was only like 27 or something like that when I was elected, so I was pretty green. And to work with these two seasoned fellows was very important to me and an honor. One of the highlights is Henry liked fireworks. And he had a big raft. So on the 4th of July, he organized blowing off the fireworks in the middle of the lake on a raft, and I got to help him. This was pretty cool because this was like a 12-foot long by maybe 8-foot raft, not very big, with all these explosives on these sort of handmade mortars to shoot them up in the air. So that was a real highlight. We bought a town truck. That was highly controversial because at the time, the road commissioner owned their own truck. But we had had a flood the year before and we needed an extra truck. So we bought a Ford 750, which is a good size, full-size truck with dump body. And we spent all of $9,995 to buy it. And boy, did the town scream. Back during that time, I don't believe we had radios in the trucks for communications. So once again, I'm sitting in the middle of the town and somebody wants to know where the town truck is, so I had to get in my pickup and drive around the route and find it and where it was stuck and then figure out how to get it out. The next year, 1975, we bought a fire truck to replace or to add to our fire department, which had a 1950 Ford truck, which was 25 years old. So I went to Harvick Motors, which is now called Lamoille Valley Ford, and bought a chassis, cab chassis, for about $9,000, brand new. And we contracted with an outfit in Montpelier called Middlesex Fire Equipment, and we had that body built there and the pump installed. The pump was $5,500. The body was, I've got the contract here, which I want to give to you guys. The body, I forget how much it was, but the total thing came to less than $25,000 for a fully equipped fire truck with hose, with ladders, with axes, ready to go. Pretty amazing, $25,000 or less, brand new truck. So that's, times have changed. So because we bought that truck, we had to put an addition on the firehouse, the old one. So for $2,600, we put that addition on the backside of the firehouse. And let's see, immediately after taking ownership of that fire truck, Mastercraft Fence Company in the Bend burned up. So we got to put it to use immediately. And actually, I think the sales guy was here showing us how to operate it, and the alarm went off. How did the alarm go off back in those days? Well, we had a phone chain and fire alarm buttons. There was one at the garage, one at Lyle's, one at the store, and one with Milton Noise. So there was an order that you called, a 4-digit phone number, and if somebody called in a fire, you pushed the button that made the alarm go off, and everybody would show up at the fire station and take off. So sure enough, we went down and got to practice with our brand new truck at Mastercraft and did a pretty darn good job of it. Okay, how much time do I have left, Nancy?
Oh, you have 3 whole minutes.
Okay, 1976 was the bicentennial of the U.S. So somebody in town, probably the Historical Society or its predecessors, decided that we were going to have a celebration here. So they started this a year earlier, and we had a fair up in front of the town hall, and equipped with magic shows, I believe, and some pretty funky music. And it may have been the beginning of the parade. I can't remember for sure, but it may or may not have. I see a head shaking, so I guess not.
That was later.
But the other really important thing that happened in 1976 was we went through 3 road commissioners. Whoa, that was a tough time. And so we were partway through the winter, and our road commissioner quit. And so I called up my good friend and neighbor, Wayne Young, who was logging at the time, and Wayne is here. I said, "Hey, Wayne, you want to get out of the woods?" So he did volunteer to take on the job of being the road commissioner, road foreman. And Wayne and I are on a party line. I had 1 ring, he had 2. So on Saturday nights, there was a certain gentleman up on Route 16 who liked to go to the Legion. And when he would get home, and if his driveway wasn't plowed, he would call me up. And if I didn't satisfy him, which chances are I didn't, then he would call Wayne. So, or if we were at each other's house having dinner or something, if my phone rang, we knew darn well his was going to ring afterwards. So, small town, there we go, I'm off. Who's next, Clive?
We want you to keep going.
That's okay, I got through it.
You take up my
That was
time.
the phone.
Go ahead.
The downside to that, having the phone like that, was when one night we closed the door to the bedroom so we didn't hear the phone, and at 3 o'clock in the morning they called, I think it was either Edward or Danny called about plowing the roads, and it must have rung 20 times, and of course Tim and Bobby heard every ring there was.
Our next select person in order of election is George Young. I have here that you were elected in 1979. Is that right, George?
I can't remember. I was appointed first to fill. I think it was Beth Watson.
There was a vacancy. Yeah.
And finished out her term, and then I was elected, and I served for
Till 2005?
26 and a half years or something like that. I haven't got much to say. The only thing I will say, what Tim said about being available, that was one of the things about farming. They never got hold of me because I was either in a barn or in a field, and so they didn't bother to call me because they knew they weren't going to get any response. But
I'll find you.
other than that, I can't,
Drive out to Hayfield, see him up to Wells.
I can't remember. I didn't write down
I
anything.
knew
But
what he was doing.
Tim's got any more you want to add on to?
Oh, it's okay.
No. Whoever's next, go ahead. Larry?
Is it there?
Okay, well, let's see. Larry, I have here you were elected first in, wait a minute.
Yeah, you're on.
Is that all right? Yeah. In 1984, does that sound right?
81.
81?
Yeah, 81.
All right, well then you are next. So tell us some anecdotes.
I remember the vote. It was one of the last ones we had up in the town hall, up in the old town hall. It was before we went to the school, I guess. Up there we did there. And it was a tough time for me. It was the first time. I like George, so I figured we had a lot in common. We did, being farmers, we could talk about something any old time we could. But, jeez, I don't know. I had a lot to learn. Zig Longren was on. He was there. And after he went off, I believe Mike came on. Yeah. Mike came on. He did that. But I have a couple of times that we got our first Green Mac truck, I believe, soon after that. And we voted for it, we did. And
No, you didn't.
no, I know, I'm just a dumb farmer. Diesel were just becoming, and that was a lot of money, and, you always try to keep a budget down, not spend much money. I didn't, but I felt bad about that. But they won me over after a while. They did. Wizzy Hall drove it. He did and I got to ride with him once. And what a difference from a gas truck to a diesel truck. They came up my road and went up Bar Hill Road in drifts, and they just went right through them just like I melted, and that impressed me. So after that, we got all our diesel trucks. I got just a couple of times, I'll tell you, and then I'll let Mike. One time I was down to the store, and I was feeling bad because things weren't going my way they want. And then I see Lewis Hill out there. He come on the sidewalk and he asked how things are going. I told him not so great. I says, and he just gave me one of the best pieces of advice in my life. He says, just be yourself, he says, and use some common sense. And I'll never forget that. I won't. Another time shortly after that, I'd been about 6 months, and Helen Lyles called me up. One time she says, when you're downtown sometimes, Larry, stop in, she says. And oh God, I'm in trouble. Back then, you heard stories about Helen, this and that, some pretty wild. So I was downtown, stopped in, got up enough courage, went across and stood on the door of the green and just knocked on the door, and you could look right in the window, and she was sitting in there in a chair, and she was screeching at somebody on a telephone. She was, and she just motioned me to come on in. She says, I stepped in the door, and she's somebody with a water department, the state, and she was ripping him something terrible. It was about pumping water to the reservoir, I guess, in the summertime. They done that back then. But I told her, I says, I can come back. No, she said, you come in. She said, I'll be with you in just a minute. She says, I would have rather been any place on this earth except there. I don't even remember what the conversation was about. I was so scared at that time. But after that, we became fairly good friends. At least we could talk to each other. We could. Another time, John Newburn, new selectman, he was awful nice fellow, liked John a lot. And we had a meeting one night, and over to the Clary place, there was a trailer that my father-in-law had rented out yet. And it was pretty bad shape, and he rented it to some people that had state welfare, and there was an old fellow living with her, he was. And he wanted to get some state help so they could all move, just him and the old lady. And me and George were doing something, so we sent John over. We did. He was new at this. He was. And he opened the door and he went in a real small trailer, and there was garbage bags piled clear to the ceiling, he said, in the little living room. And there was this old lady sitting in a chair there. And John talked to him a little bit, and the old lady never moved. And next meeting or whenever we had a meeting, John come back, he says, God, he says, I thought she was dead. He says, George and me got a big kick out of that. We knew what was happening, but we had some fine times. I think it was a real pleasure to serve with George and Mike and John and anybody that wants to open up a whole new world, It's just, it's fun. It's really exciting, it was. You get to meet a lot of good people. 99% of the people are really good, and then there's the other 1%. But I had a fun time. I have fond memories of a lot of things that went on. We'll let Mike talk next.
Mike, you had something like 5 or 6 different terms on the select board, did you? The first one was 84, so you're next in line.
I'll ditto a couple of things that have been said having to do with various concerns, including Helen. One of the I think all constituencies of the town need to feel connected one way or another to the select board, and feeling that at least their concerns are heard. And in addition to being part of the I Married Greensboro Club, which I'd been on the select board for 15 years before I became anything other than the junior member, because both of these guys were on there for that entire time. But I had an additional job as well as teaching. I had a rubbish business in which I went around the lake, and of course 2/3 of the tax base in this town, 2/3 of the taxes are paid by people who don't get to vote. And because I was stopping in at all of these places, I will admit that there was at least one place that I looked to see if the fellow's car was in his driveway, and I decided I can come back later, because then I knew that I wasn't going to hear some of the litany of sins that the town was involved in. I do remember when Billy Smith wanted to put a hot dog stand up on the beach road, and of course every day I collected the rubbish, I would stop in at Helen Lyle's and get the list of people who had recently arrived, whose rubbish I had to start picking up, and this was an opportunity to hear about the stench of hot dogs, which was a term that I think we all remember, at least the three of us who were on the board. One of the things that I very much enjoyed back in 1983, at the town meeting in the spring, there'd been a vote. I think it was 83. There'd been a vote to instruct the select board either to come up with plans to either tear down the town hall and replace it, or figure out what it was going to do with the town hall. And within a couple of weeks after that, the federal government announced some community development block grant money, and Willie Smith chaired a committee that came up with plans to rebuild the town hall. And my father-in-law, who was on the select board, volunteered me to write the grant. And as it turns out, we got $83,000 from the feds, which was enough to replace the plumbing, the wiring, the roof, and put a new foundation on the building, jacking it 8 inches or 1 foot and 4 inches, something like that. But since one of the select board members, Sig, he wanted to tear the building down, we had to have a special town meeting to decide whether we would accept this grant. We held that town meeting in the parish hall down at St. Mike's, and I was not yet on the select board, but I got to sit a couple of rows back and answer questions about the grant, and there were others, but Justice Rehnquist, who was by then on the Supreme Court, sat right behind me, and I really enjoyed him leaning over and tapping me on the shoulder and asking me questions about how these processes of government work here. That's cool. I will say that the most emotional issues that select boards have to deal with have to do with people's dogs. When somebody's dog, and we had a dog that was pulled a Mike Tyson on somebody down, bit somebody's ear down in Greensboro Bend, and then we have to deal with that. Those are things, and things having to do with people's animals in general. But one of my most fun, I suspect I'm out of time now.
No, don't keep talking.
Okay. One of the most fun items that three of us got involved with was the gravel pit that the town had been buying gravel from up in Glover came up for sale, and I think the fella Perrin wanted $325,000 or something for it. And Valdine Hall, who was assistant town clerk at the time, said, this is what it'll cost to pay off a mortgage on that over, I think it was 25 years. And the price of gravel has been going up. We looked into it, and we had a special town meeting, and we bought the gravel pit for, I'd hoped we'd get it for $300. We got it for $315, I think. And if the price of gravel continued to rise at the rate it had been rising, within 12 years the gravel would be free if we used the same amount. Well, we started using more because we owned it by now, and within 8 years it was free. because the price of gravel rose even more rapidly. But one of the other things that happened was back in the 80s, we had a couple of summers where we had some significant flooding, washed out the upper Elligo Road, major damage that we had to get fixed. And whereas in Johnson, it wrecked their sewage treatment plant, and the feds, FEMA would pay 90% of the cost. But Johnson had to come up with all the rest. In this case, when we lost some roads, it would pay 90% of the cost, but that cost includes the gravel you use, the trucks you use to go get it, the time of the personnel who have to go get it, and we of course already had in our budget to pay the road crew. We were paying off the bank notes to the bank, or after we had a capital budget, we owned the trucks outright. This was very fortunate because at this point, the windows in Town Hall upstairs, which had a couple of classrooms, a couple of the windows blew out and a big piece of glass landed in the driveway. Okay, so we were able to use, thanks, we were able to use FEMA money to buy the new windows, about $30,000, and to cover that. The next year we got some more, so we replaced the windows at the other floor, because what they were paying us for was stuff that we already had in our budget. It was, I think there might properly be differences in how that money is handed out, but there's some great stories about the Bread and Puppet Theater, but those will be later if you ask.
Well, the first lady member of the board was Beth Watson, who was elected in 1977. Does that sound right? And only served about a year and a half, and then resigned. And so we waited then until 2005. Is that right, Ann?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, and Ann Stevens. Ever since then, we've had female members of the board. So, Ann, tell us a few things.
Yeah, so into this man's world walked me. So it was very interesting, and I really encourage people to do it, to get on the board, and not just the select board, but all the other town committees, the planning commission, and all those stuff that make the town run. It's really important that we step up and do it, and you feel like you're contributing. And it's very interesting to see how the different pieces of the town fit together. I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and I do recommend it to people. I met a lot of people like these guys that I would never have gotten beyond hi to at Willie's by being on the select board, and it was great. Although I have to say, Larry reminded me. I was kind of amazed, astonished, and quite amazed at the amount of time that we spent talking about trucks. And I thought, this is why we have a road crew and a road foreman. So I sort of worked to get the trucks kind of out of the select board meeting time, which we did end up spending less time on trucks eventually, except when they needed to buy one or something. But stuff like that was very interesting, and I was more interested in kind of people-focused stuff. I loved it it was really interesting when people come to the select board with their projects about this and that, and they'd want our permission, or they'd want our input, or they'd want to buy something or whatever. And it was really fun to see how that all worked. What else? It wasn't all roses. We had 2 lawsuits against the board when I was on it, and that was zero fun. In fact, it ran into the negative amount of fun. So that was a downside. I think that epic, I think that epic is a little bit over. Is it over, Sue? Well, maybe not. And there are some aspects of it that were not so much fun.
Are you talking Perrin Road? Because I can scratch.
No, I'm not naming names. What else? Oh, let's see, what else did I have to say? I actually made some notes. It was also, there was some interaction with the state government at that point, which was also fun. And there's a town committee that I hadn't really known about, which is the BCA, which the Board of, what's it stand for?
Civil Authority.
Civil Authority. The Board of Civil Authority involves all the people and all all the elected officials, I guess, justice of the peace and select board people and this and that. And I was really extremely impressed with how well the BCA operates, how civil it was, and how just efficient. And so I don't know. I just want to recommend that. Just put in a plug for the BCA.
Tell us what it does.
It sort of adjudicates a lot of different things. Like if you want to appeal your taxes, you go to the BCA. What else? Tim has more.
You purge the checklist.
Yeah.
Review the checklist before any election to be sure that everybody's on there, is supposed to be on there. They haven't moved on. But pretty much we...
Count the votes?
Counting votes.
And count votes, yes.
Though they're all done.
It actually took me a while to discover the BCA when I got on the board. So I only went to the last few years of meetings after I discovered it. But I was quite impressed by it. What else? Shortly after I got on, there was shortly after being a week or so after, there was the controversy people may remember about the mental health facility in town. The state hospital was ordered to close because they didn't meet federal funding standards or something. And so they wanted to put an ancillary state mental facility in at the Lakeview Inn. So I was sort of neutral about that idea. However, most of the town was not neutral. And I was the only one on the select board that had email at that point. So that put me in a very precarious position. I got all these emails from winter people, and then all the summer people, and all over the place, and then all the media, the press, state officials. I was getting phone calls from press and state officials. I've been on the board a week or two. I was the first woman since Beth, and I was like, oh my God, what's going on? But anyway, so but it was interesting. I mean, I had to listen to everybody's input and try and make sense out of it. And we had a huge town meeting at the school, which we filled the gym, and a bunch of people came out from the state and to deal with the irate townspeople. It was classic. Ultimately, and I would get phone calls from people who were, for instance, parents of people who were mental health patients, and they said, this is not a good idea. And then I would get all kinds of emails. Mostly people were opposed to it. The guy from the State Agency of Human Services told me that I'd set mental health in Vermont back 30 years. So it's all very, so we muddled through that. Isn't it going to ring? Let's see. But I'm going to go back to the aspect of all the different town committees and encouraging people to join them, because it's important to the community that we get involved, and it's interesting, and you make a real contribution. So that's that. I'm done. 5 minutes. Ding.
Our last speaker is Marsha Daniels Gadoury, who was elected in 2010 and served until 2016.
All right, so my take on this whole thing is a little different than young folks here because I haven't been around as long with all your stories. So I am going to give you an overview of the situations that the Select Board deals with. And you'll either want to join, and we wish you would. But anyway, as a former member of the Select Board for 6 years, I came to realize the magnitude of the position. We each gave so much time and energy making decisions that affected all our lives, but also understood how much more knowledge we gained as individuals. Back in 2012, when I was chair of the board, I had the honor of representing Greensboro at the 40th anniversary of Bar Hill Conservancy, along with Clive Gray. It was a beautiful day. We enjoyed lunch with many of the outstanding people while taking in the gorgeous views. I was going to talk about Perrin Road, but I think I'll let that go by. Just as you asked about the good things and the bad, so I'll forget the bad. When the fire station agenda came before the board, a committee was formed spearheading Erica Kopp, and they conducted informational gatherings to keep the public informed of its progress. We formed liaisons, so Warren and I worked with the road crew, overseeing operations and keeping the board informed. When it came time to order a new truck, which you already spoke about, we would meet and go over the specs. As much as anything, I came to respect the work of the road crew, especially in the winter. My most humorous time was after the board voted to remove the tree on the green. Because of its age, cost of bulbs, the electric grill, there were delays in getting the job done. So, Warren Hill Sr., Warren Jr., Laura, and myself met one very early Sunday morning down at the park. And what seemed like thieves in the night, ye old tree was down, leaving only a few shavings. For days, no mention was made of the missing tree, but we knew that tax dollars had been saved. So I end with how I felt about this was to be a productive member of the Select Board takes a great deal of activism and diplomacy. The knowledge gained and the reward for serving our community come back to us tenfold, as you said. I am forever grateful for the opportunity to have served on the Select Board. Amen.
Okay, well, I think we're open to not only questions, but discussion. So, members of the panel, have anything to add, or members of the audience?
Mike said he had some circus about. Bread and puppet.
Lawrence has reminded me that we would get briefed by the police chief, and I remember one time about any incidents in town. He reported that a person had called the police department and said that when he got into his camp, he found a duck in the closet. And what should he do? And the police chief said, I told him he should open the door and let it out. And the fellow reported back to him that that had happened and that worked. And another report was that a fellow reported to the police chief that he had been down at the lake and some fella had gone by in a canoe, two people in the canoe, and one of them had, in a very loud voice, used the F word at the other one, and he was reporting it and he didn't know what he was supposed to do, and the police chief thanked him for his information. So there are, you get to learn all sorts of good stuff. Actually, one of the, what I hinted I'd like to tell you about is, once we bought the gravel pit in Glover, which is adjacent to where the Bread and Puppet has an old gravel pit that's sort of an amphitheater where they've done the Bread and Puppet Theater every year for years. The fellow who'd sold us the gravel pit said, listen, I'd like to keep parking cars. I'm happy to pay the town $500 to park cars there for the And we talked about it a little and decided we could probably make a whole lot more money than that parking cars. And so what we did was we asked the fire department, the library, the Bend School, listen, if you want to park cars, you can, depending on how many hours each of you work, you can put that money into your own budget. These are organizations that ask the town to support them at March meeting. And so they did that. And a couple of weeks before the Bread and Puppet Theater, I noticed in the Chronicle out of Barton that the select board and Glover was annoyed at not being able to, with vendors setting up along Route 122 and people parking there, and they felt if they had to get a fire truck or an ambulance up 122, they might not be able to do it. So I went to the select board and Glover and said, listen, I'm not going to kick them off Route 122, but if you want a place for vendors, the town of Greensboro will be happy to lay out some places and rent them to them. And so Valdine Hall oversaw a bunch of that. She and I went up and staked out areas. We also, the select board managed or the town government managed people coming and renting camping spaces. I think it was $5 to camp there. And so I had never been to the Bread and Puppet Theater. I did stay up there. We borrowed Bill Eisner Sr.'s camper, and I slept in that and took $5 from people who wanted to camp. And in the morning I discovered there were even more people who'd come in the middle of the night. And the day that they were leaving, there were a few people who still hadn't paid, and I was going around and oh man, all I got is about $8, and it's going to cost me that for gas to get back to Boston. I said, and so I noticed the 2 6-packs on the seat, and I said, give me those, and I sold those to somebody else. I sold those to other people, or people who didn't have much money. I'd say, here's a black plastic bag, go fill this up with returnable cans and bottles and come give it to me and then you can leave. And when we got most of the area cleaned up that way, there's a bunch of rubbish over in the hedgerow over there. Would you go fill up these couple of bags with that? And so I think entrepreneurial government's a good idea.
Mike, I remember walking up that where the vendors were,
Yes.
and it was as if you were smoking marijuana yourself.
Actually, the one of the outfits that we had rented some space to had a fellow had a business of doing body art, and body art meant tattoos as well as piercings, and he had done some piercings on a 14-year-old girl without getting her mother's permission or something, and the mom was upset, and there were a number of other sketchy things about him, and so the Board of Health was called, and he decided to leave before they got there. But I'm walking up there, and there's a fellow who's got a sausage vending outfit. I go by, and he's got a big bandage on his left thumb and palm of his hand. And I said, what happened? I said, you remember the fellow over there? And he pointed to the empty vendor space. And the guy had a sign for tattoos and body piercings, and he had a line on there that said genitals pierced. And he said, so I said, I asked you about your thumb. He said, yeah. He said, I looked over there and somebody was, and he said, and then I realized what I heard sizzling was my own left hand. And as I say, as you said, yes, I went to college in the 60s. No, I didn't touch pot, but you could probably have gotten high if you just stood around there very long. That's true. As I was handing out black plastic bags as people were leaving, I saw some amazing things.
I also remember that Valdine gave the prime spot away from that and way up close to Bread and Puppet to the school. And that I don't even remember, I think we sold food, some food thing. We made a lot of money from the elementary school doing that. And we were out of the scene.
We put the money from doing the camping and the vendor spaces, we put that into a separate fund, and we used that to take care of the overburden when we had to expand the gravel pit. And we also, the Act 250 permit that we got required us to water the road going in. And the fellow parent who'd been there had a very tiny spring at one point, and he had some very muddy water that was all the water in the area. He did rent some portalets, but we were able to put in a well with some of that money, and we did that. Now, the reason that the Bread and Puppet quit doing things that they had people camp there on their land, our land, and parents still had some land, was that one evening a couple of people were hopped up on something. One of them managed to get in a fight with another, and I've forgotten exactly how it happened, but the other guy died. And so they decided they didn't want to have any be associated with that. I'm not happy he died. I'm happy that he didn't die on Greensboro land. There's strange things done in places like that.
Leo, would you like to take the mic around? Where's the...
Greensboro, the gravel pit still operative there?
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, I think, what do we own, 82 acres?
Yeah, I think that's around that.
I think it's about 80 acres, and there were 15 or 16 that were already open. Yeah, it's up just off to the east, just before Route 122, as you go up Route 16 into Glover.
We crush here every year.
Yeah.
One of the first things I did when I got on the select board was take a tour of the gravel pit. The road foreman took me around, and I checked out all the piles of gravel, and it was very interesting, actually. Other interesting aspects of the select board that are things like learning about the police, a little bit about what the police contracts. And I remember when they got radios, there was a time when several years, maybe 10 years ago, they got all the trucks got radios on the same, getting them on the same frequency was an issue. But there are tons of things like that I would have never had anything to do with it, were really important things, and you learn just, what it takes to run a town, all these important things.
I think it was Larry spoke about buying the Mack truck. Well, that was Sig's thing, because we'd always had just these big Ford dump trucks, and they were okay, but they broke down in the most inopportune times. The gas engines underpowered. There was a sander that ran off the back that had a chain that ran off the rear wheel, like a bicycle chain, and the thing was always flipping off. They were always broken. And Sig said, we need a Mack truck. And managed to persuade the town to buy a Mack truck, which was a good thing, because they could put a wing on it. And when they're plowing, therefore the snow could get beyond the ditches.
Yeah.
And ditches. We didn't used to have ditches. The road stopped where the stone wall was, or the trees were, or whatever. The select board hired a road foreman named Mike Leonard, and who was a really bright guy with a lot of common sense. And I recall that Gebby Road washed out, as it usually did, because there was no ditches and the water made its own ditches. So Mike said, okay, we're going to ditch this, we're going to put down fabric paper, we're going to put down crusher run gravel, because we now had this great gravel pit. Gebby Road hasn't washed out since. And I don't know how long ago, that was during your reign, you guys.
Long time ago.
Kudos to you for hiring a good guy and supporting him to make some decent roads. So the fact that we have ditches, and when they plow with these wings, the snow gets beyond the ditches, it's not in the road. Mud season isn't anything like it used to be. You haven't been stuck until you've been stuck going downhill in a four-wheel drive. Then you're stuck. And that's when you hope that Peter or Donnie come by with a tractor and get you out of there. And Donald Gebby, their dad, used to haul the milk truck all the way up Gebby Road from East Craftsbury Road with his crawler so they could get the milk out. The trucks wouldn't make it. And when our kids were quite young, I can remember, I think it was John, got a ride home in the town bucket loader, because Wayne would commute with a bucket loader. So it was tough. But
The roads were so bad that the only way I could get home was to use the town truck
yeah,
to get through the mud. That's how
Yeah.
bad it was.
the mud was deep, but these guys, by hiring good people and putting money into the equipment, made all the difference.
The gravel pit was the best thing this town ever did.
Oh, yeah.
One of the best.
You're doing well.
Well,
Yes.
I wanted to ask Larry, he said 99% of the people were good, but the 1%. I'm curious, what do you remember without names on the 1%?
Do not tell that
I
story.
just got a second opinion. Yeah. Gee.
Some of those folks are still alive.
No names.
No. No, we had some fine times at selectmen meetings, we did, but once in a while things would get pretty hot too, they would. Different people come in. I can remember virtually one time we had a family in town, we won't give no names, but they came in, and when they was on the agenda, boy, you just dreaded to have a meeting. You did, because you knew he wasn't going to make no headway at all that night, you know. It was like going out and talk to that car tire, you know. George was sitting at the edge of the table there, and one of the young fellows virtually called George a liar. He did, boy. George got up like that, and I sat next to him, and something's going to happen here. I said, they smoothed it out, but boy, you know, I thought something was really going to happen. They did. An interesting thing that sticks in my mind too is when the town hall was done. Cole, was he the guy that done the town hall foundation? Anyway, he called me one time. He says there's 2 sheets of asbestos. He says downstairs in the hot lunchroom. And he says, what do you want me to do with them? He says. And that was just when asbestos was becoming a thing where the state got in on it. And I thought about it. And I says, can you make them disappear? He says, we never had this conversation. And that was the last I heard it. We did not want the state to come in at that time. Another time.
And the statute of limitations is now run out.
Yeah, it's right after. Another time, Bernie Atherton, the asbestos that's wrapped around the hot water pipes in all the old buildings, you'll see it. And down the Greensboro Bend School there was, and Bernie Atherton says, I'm still alive, he says, and I helped put that in, he says. So, you know, and they took it out, I guess, so they wrapped it back then. But it was interesting stuff like that, you know. One more time, and then I'll let somebody else talk. Board of Civil Authority over on Elgo Lake. Wendell Shepherd had a camp over there. Half of it was in Craftsbury and the other half was in Greensboro. So we went over and looked at it one time, we did that, and he showed us where the line run right down through the middle of the living room. He did that. I don't remember what happened then.
Well, I remember what happened is that he said, because this is where the property line is, and I looked at the paperwork he had, and I said, well, it says it's so far from one water pipe to the other. I said, that doesn't seem far enough, and I paced it off, and I found another border pipe sitting in the woods. I think that was it. And, no, it didn't go through his living room. It was fine.
That's good. I'm all set.
Were any of you on when we went from a 3 to 5? I don't know. 4, and why did we do that?
Because I put out a petition and suggested a 5-man board, and it was agreed that it was a good thing to do. I think it was because I wanted to be on it and there wasn't room for me. Just a guess.
When I was in the legislature, I would go to either select board meetings or town meetings. One time I went to 14 different, I represented 41 towns and cities, grants and gores in the Essex-Orleans district in 5 counties. And my observation in general is that you need to have connections to the various constituencies in town. A town like Barton is an example where you really need to have somebody from the village of Barton, someone from the village of Orleans, and someone from the countryside. My observation also is that with a strong town manager or town administrator, that it works better. I'm fairly partial to the 3-member board, simply probably because that's what I served on. But I think it's harder for things to, even though there are fewer members, it's harder for things to fall through the cracks with 3 members because you become pretty, or at least that's with some stability, long-term stability, longitudinally. But there certainly are reasons that various people, we've got to be careful that we have people who can communicate with the various different constituencies in town. And this is a town, fortunately, I grew up in a summer community, Woods Hole, Massachusetts, that had a huge transit population. We've been very fortunate. We have a very strong, very stable population of folks whose families have been here for a century or more, or at least many decades, as well as folks whose families have always been here. And in any case, a couple of ramblings.
I have a question for you.
Yes,
The reason I thought that it would be a good thing to have a 5-member board also is that if one of you were sick, could you have a meeting? Because there was no quorum.
Oh, no, 2 is a quorum.
Oh, 2
2
is a
out of
quorum.
3, it's a majority.
I just learned something new today. I probably learned it a long time ago, but forgot it.
And Peggy was on the select board also.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think one of my favorite discussions when I was on the select board had to do with chickens. Chickens in the road. Did we need an ordinance to ban chickens in the road in Greensboro? And we decided we didn't need that ordinance. And I hope you all agree with us, but we think that the chickens are part of the local culture, and we like our chickens. But every now and then on the Bend Road, there is a mushed chicken.
I just like to say something funny about Elligo Lake. I grew up my whole life on Elligo Lake, since a knee-high to a grasshopper. And my family, Daniel's family, is up there. My cousin Bobsy, that you all know, said, well, you're on the select board. Why didn't you come over here and we'd like you, we have to do the milfoil. And we'd like you to name the milfoil, what was it called, what do you call it, that you go out on. It wasn't a boat, it was flat anyway. So, a harvester, thank you. So I came up with the bright idea and I thought it was very simple. Millifoil. And that's what it was.
Nancy.
Can you explain the relationship between the town clerk, you're our governing body, I mean, you work, and the town clerk? And we have a town clerk right here, but there's a relationship. How does that work? You make the laws, and the town clerk, I know I don't know. Do you go to all the meetings? I mean,
I do. Basically what the town clerk does is the recording of the documents, but the board is basically the decision-making entity. You know, they meet once a month and whatever comes up. I handle things like chickens in the road, or this year we had pigs. It's, little, in the middle of the night calls. If I get notified if the schools are closed, so I can tell the road guys, whether it's 4 in the morning or the night before. But basically the day-to-day things of just keeping our documents, that's what I do, keeping our documents recorded so that it's accessible, helping with the lister we have an assessor now who comes in and values our property and makes sure all that's in place so that the taxes can be raised per the values that we have. But day-to-day governing is still the board.
Dog licenses.
Dog licenses.
Dog licenses.
Yes, and making sure that the dogs are licensed and rabies and things. I mean,
You
just,
send out the tax.
and we do send
That's a
out the
trick.
tax bills for everybody.
And you collect.
Now, the education tax bills as well as town.
The statute says that the legislative body of the town, first of all, the legislative body is town meeting. But between town meetings, the legislative body is the select board. So they make the ordinances, and the town clerk is charged with carrying them out. Now, the select board does not control the town clerk, nor, because we're independently elected. Just as at the federal level, just as at the state and national level, you have separate branches of government.
The town clerk is very helpful in giving us the legal standing of this and that we're working on, what the precedents are and what the actual law is. And I found that very helpful.
Yeah, very much. We can get help from NVDA, which is the Regional Planning Commission, and Development Board, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns that I served on the board of. Bridget Collier served on the board of the league. There used to be a state planning office. There are numbers of different resources, regional and statewide, that can provide significant assistance there. Secretary of State's office, especially on elections, and
Almost anything.
yeah. And that varies depending on the Secretary of State and how recently they've reorganized the office, but absolutely. Those sources are all very helpful in the day-to-day running of the town.
I have a question for anyone that wants to answer. Of course, Greensboro has a local winter population, but then also has a high seasonal population. I'd be interested in your reaction to the relationship of the winter population to the seasonal population. There must have been some differences when you got into select board meetings.
I think that's one of the reasons that it's very, very important that people in all the constituencies in town feel that they are being heard. I think part of it, one of the advantages that this community has is that the year-round and the summer community, the vacation community and the year-round community are both very, very stable. That is, it's not as though we have large numbers. Having grown up on Cape Cod, I've watched people who were there much of the summer just to have fun and things their parents didn't know they were doing. Whereas here with a long-term, stable summer vacation community, I think that's a huge advantage.
So I grew up as a summer kid, so when I got on the board, all the summer people naturally brought me their issues, which I thought was good, and I felt I was able to help them. And so I don't know what's happening now, but I did feel that, at least the summer community, I was a constituency that I was representing, as well as the winter people. And I still am impressed at how well the summer people and the winter people get along. I think that's really to our credit as a town, that we're so well integrated.
You want to talk about how you select the Greensboro Award winner?
At various times, town clerks have often received nominations, or people that will come in, or they'll see a member of the select board and say, I think so-and-so deserves some credit for this and that. They've been giving out the award. Sig Lundgren started that about 1983, I think, somewhere in there, early 80s. And the first time, I think 5 people, what was this hand? Was it
3?
Was it 3?
I think it was 3.
An old joke. But various, for several years, individuals had been put on, and then it was realized sometime in the 80s, late 80s, we've given an award to this person, and it was usually the person with the Y chromosome in the relationship. And after that, there was a good deal of feeling, you know, there are a couple of people, both of whom have participated, and without one person, the other probably wouldn't have deserved an award. So you'll see more and more after the process had been going for a decade or so that many of the awards are to Mr. and Mrs.
Greensboro is, I think, the only town in the state that pays to plow driveways.
Yes.
And when we changed, ever since I was on, the town plowed the driveway, but it used to be done with a road crew. And of course, it was always done with a bucket loader, and it was all overtime. So it cost more, and it took us about 3 years to finally decide to contract it out, which cut down the overtime from the town crew, but it got done at a more speedier time, and it got done quicker. That's all. It just because the roads were opened before driveways were, and so. But that was one of the big discussions we had. It took more than 1 year to get that.
Yeah, we started. We let a contract around 1985, I think, to plow both villages, and 2 years later there was a contract to plow both villages and around the lake, and then we put out an RFP to everybody who had a couple of plow truck or a plow truck, said make a proposal either for part of town or all of it, and as I recall, it was $7.50 or so per driveway when we started. It's now something like $15 or something per driveway it's now 5 inches instead of 4, but it's still, that includes driveways 1/4 mile long. There's no better bargain. Now, if you absolutely have to get out at 0500, you may need to either have your own equipment or pay somebody to come in. But the system is absolutely the cheapest that you can get your driveway plowed in the state. And it costs a little more because when we quit plowing people's dooryards with a Mack truck, some people were more willing to have a pickup truck come into their dooryard than they were to have a 10-wheeler come into their drive.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to your subject, Judy, because I am so happy with the way it turned out that HCA and the cheese and all the businesses were able.
Beer.
The beer especially.
Don't forget that.
And how they all integrated into the town, and there was so much discussions when I was on the board of whether it would work with them being here in this small, quaint town, and it seems to have worked out fine as far as I can tell. Does anybody want to talk about it?
There's another side to that I've heard. The other side to that overall contract is that there are individual plowers that would love to have had the opportunity to plow driveways, and that there are people who feel that the overall contract deprives them of that opportunity.
When we went to that, we did put out an RFP that anybody could do that, could apply, could bid to plow driveways. And we still do. I mean, that's put out all the time, about every 5 years, every 3 years. Thanks. A couple of things mentioned earlier. Beth Watson, who had served part of one term, was stopped by the police right up above my in-laws' house when she was a selectman, and the policeman told her that she'd been driving too fast and gave her a ticket, and she said, "You should see how fast my son drives. You have no right to give me a ticket." The other thing I'll mention, and I'm since 1985, I've been registering students to vote at graduation at Hazen Union. And a couple of times I've had students, and I did retire not quite 4 years ago from that, but a couple of times I had students, the next time there was a national election, House of Representatives, Senate, presidency, find out from all the town clerks of towns that sent us students what the address was to get an absentee ballot, what the voting hours were, etc. Urge kids to register to vote. It's really important. And I'm pleased that we've got higher turnout in Vermont than almost any other state. We're among the top 2 or 3 states every year as far as percent voting. But we need to work on it to keep that available.
Well, I think we're very thankful to our panel